Hi, this is Mish.
And this is Jim.
And this is Business Bites,
where we unpack the business news. And today we're going to talk about a foundation for business in the United States, which is energy. And we're having a lot of interesting energy issues, which we hope to expose you to, as well as having an interview with PNM and what's their 20-year plan for energy production here in northern New Mexico. So let's begin. Why do we need so much energy, Mish? What's it all about?
Well, it's interesting that as we grow economically, the demand for energy keeps increasing. So where is that demand coming from? Number one, obviously, we have AI and data centers.
That's a huge issue. People don't understand it.
Right. You have companies like Meta that just made billions and billion-dollar investment into nuclear energy, but that's still far away. We also have a stress on our grid system. We've seen that over and over every summer. As the summers seem to get hotter, our energy demands rise, and then we cannot seem to support the grid system. We wind up with these massive blackouts.
Also, Trump wants to bring steel production back to the United States. As little steel as we make in the United States, it comprises almost 10% of our total energy consumption to make the little steel that we make. So if he wants to double steel production, it's going to literally double our energy just in that sector of the economy.
It's a domino effect right now. I'm calling it all energy hands on deck because I love to make titles for things. Is on top of the rising costs of everything because of the demands being greater than the supply. And we can certainly look at New Mexico and the recent stats in terms of oil. The rig counts have gone down for 7 weeks in a row. We just took out over 10 million barrels of our reserve here in the United States. So that means that you're going to have oil going up, which trickles down to gas going up, trickles down to coal going up, which trickle down to solar and wind, except the government by announcing that they were taking away all the tax incentives until through 2028 or into 2028. So I think people need to be prepared for this sort of perfect storm of a really rough time seasonally, globally, and be prepared for what could be coming much higher energy costs personally as we get into the summer. My advice, as somebody who does this for a living, not only was I an oil trader in New York in the futures exchange back in the day, I also point people towards making sure, A, they're aware of the current events and how it might affect their pocket, and B, what you could possibly do about it, not just from a practical standpoint, but also from an investment standpoint.
Basically, three things that are really important in energy production, or four, I should say. Number one, you have to meet the increased demand, and we've talked about there's some unusual, especially these AI centers are going to be phenomenal increases in demands. You want reliable energy, which means steady production, but also there's a difference between peak demand and base demand. And during the summer, that's why there's blackouts and brownouts, because sometimes we cannot meet that peak demand. There's cost. And finally, the fourth one is greenhouse gases. And we need to transition away from oil, gas, and coal because they are clearly greenhouse gas producers. What are some good ways to get energy from? Let's talk about solar and wind, which is everybody's preferred way of getting it. The costs are low, correct?
Lower, right? They've come down. Obviously, this incentive, the fact that the government took away the incentives, the tax incentives, hurts the consumer more than the producer because the panels may go up, but it's still low cost and could get a lot more interesting in terms of cost compared to oil and gas if that continues to go up.
And even in Texas, they have a lot of, those of you who've driven to Amarillo, you've seen all the wind farms. Wind farms are cheaper than oil and gas production to get energy.
Yeah, now we're really spoiled here in Santa Fe because no matter how hot it is during the day, generally, if you have cross ventilation and a ceiling fan in your room, you don't need to run your air conditioner or your mini split or your swamp cooler to at night to get cool in your room. So that's one thing. I mean, there's
solar and wind is that it's not good for peak demand. So you need to develop other ways to deliver peak demand energy. What are the different ways we can meet peak demand energy?
Well, let's go back to oil. Old reliable oil, which And now we're seeing that actually the Permian Basin is maxing out in terms of what they can produce. So this is another reason, by the way, that oil prices were already destined to go up even before this thing happened in the Middle East. And so now that we're looking at, time of conversation here, $75 a barrel if you're looking at West Texas crude oil.
Yep.
That is concerning. People are talking about 85, 95, even a possible $120 a barrel, depending on what happens with the Middle East and that escalating. So I guess the best thing right now is, before they take away all the tax credits in EVs, you might want to consider one of those. Although they do require energy, you do have to plug them in.
Yes. Basically, you're suggesting that unless we're going to really start tapping the North Sea extensively, and there's only so much in the North Sea, the new sources of energy are diminishing.
The old sources of energy are diminishing. Well, there's plenty of natural gas. Let's talk natural gas. I mean, obviously, it's still trading under $4. And actually, it was under $3.50 until this week that we're talking, because of, as I said, that domino effect as all energy hands on deck. Once one thing gets expensive, everything else starts rising in prices, people looking at cheaper alternatives. But there's still plenty of natural gas, controversial, of course, but that's beside the point. We can pull more gas out of the ground, and we're doing that in New Mexico, obviously.
Natural gas and oil, because there's a limited supply, it's not a long-term reliable source of energy.
Yeah, I mean, we're in a transition right now, so we have to get through it.
But let's talk about, God forbid, coal.
Dirty coal.
I mean, we have a ton of it. I mean, there's so much of it in our country. We have some of the largest coal reserves in the world here in the United States. It'd take forever to go through that.
True. And if we're really going to all energy hands on deck, then coal all of a sudden comes back into the conversation. So
a lot of our listeners hate for me to even suggest that, because it's awful in terms of greenhouse gases. But it's a reliable source of help us meet peak demands.
And that is always the rub, right? There is the reality of meeting the human needs, which keep growing. And then there is the danger of meeting the human needs in terms of, are we essentially wiping ourselves off the planet at some point? We don't know, but most people will tell you, be here now. I mean, people need to live now. And luckily, there are companies like P&M who are thinking about the future. But this is a very tough time to really be so concerned about the future when people are going to try to figure out how to just live day to day with their energy needs right now in 2025.
Well, let's talk about the other controversial topic, nuclear energy, which has a lot of attractors and detractors. Major things about it is that it provides good base energy 24/7. P&M uses nuclear energy, and it's keeping its stake in that nuclear energy facility in Arizona.
I think they said they had one 600 megawatt facility.
It's not much, but it's some. What are your thoughts about nuclear?
I think that the fear, of course, we're looking at things like 3 Mile Island and some of the things that happened in the past. The storage of it, obviously, is an issue as well. But from what I've spoken to people who are scientists at the labs, and I know you had a conversation with somebody as well, they've made tremendous improvements in terms of being able to use the nuclear energy as a clean energy source. And as I said before, Meta made a huge investment, as Amazon's looking into it as well. And I think that is going to be the future. But again, here we are. There's the immediate needs versus the future needs. And how do you juggle that?
And building a nuclear power plant, new one, was a 7-year project.
Easily, and uranium costs are already rising and will continue to rise, especially since you can't mine without oil to provide the engine, if you will, for steel and concrete and the rest of it.
So everyone's predicting just utility costs are going to go up.
Foretold is forewarned. That's exactly what we're trying to do here, is not scare you, but at least leave you educated enough to understand the reality. That's not necessarily a guarantee that it will happen, although all the signposts seem to be, at least for now, looking at short-term pain, however long short-term is at this point.
For the listener who has come in late, this is James Werble and Mish Schneider with Business Bites, where we're talking about energy production in the United States. We will be talking to Lori Williams from P&M, who is in charge of developing a 20-year plan for generating energy. What do you think is the future for energy production in the United States?
I think it's inevitable, especially if you're looking at the younger generations and you ask them about their major concerns for the environment, and they're very keen. And I believe that they will look more and more towards electric vehicles, wind, solar, nuclear, and try to really diminish their footprints. They've already been doing that anyway, their carbon footprints, and that will be the future. Our future generations is the future, and I don't believe that they're going to be pushing for more oil, gas, and coal as they get older.
Increasing energy costs makes people conserve more, and we just have to consider in mind it's painful, but sometimes people will just start finding ways to go back to carpooling. I still like to carpool, and I know some of our listeners like to carpool, but there's ways that we can save energy. And we can do better at that, always do better at that. I think that we will slowly but surely wean ourselves off of carbon fuels over time. It takes time to transition. Most of the states that are doing it aggressively have a plan by 2050 to be relatively free of carbon. And I think we need to look at solar, wind, of course. I do think nuclear will come back into the picture.
I think we also have to watch what Musk does, because we know Musk has really been and still is in the forefront of this alternative universe of energy use, down to the recent robo-taxis and, rocketry, and now we're looking at flying cars as a potential.
Those will be higher energy costs, though.
Well, we don't know how they'll fuel. It could be on nuclear.
Yeah.
So I do believe, especially if you are our generation and you're looking at your kids and your grandkids and your future great-grandkids, I do believe that we'll have to figure this out. Necessity is the mother of invention, and it's already well into play.
Yeah. Let's hear what P&M has to offer as a potential solution, and the optimism that's shared from Lori Williams about the future with P&M and how they are planning to get their energy here in New Mexico.
My position at P&M is I am currently the Vice President of Integrated Planning. Okay. So I think over the next 20 years, kind of globally, I'll give you our goals and the things we're really thinking about, and then go into a little bit about detail about what's in the plan. So from the global perspective, I think for us, top of mind are things like reliability. I think that is number one in everybody's mind. And kind of paired with that, thinking about customer affordability. A transition is a major change to the system, and I think customer affordability has to be right up there with reliability in terms of the weight that we're giving it in consideration. We also have a number of state and company environmental objectives. I think everyone is aware of the climate risk and the climate impacts that we're already feeling. So both the state of New Mexico and P&M are very interested in reducing carbon intensity.
Well, let's talk about cost and reliability. Let's first talk about cost, which of course is a big issue for our consumers. And
yes.
And you're going to have to build a lot of new wind and solar, which is not that, but new transmission lines from where they're located. And you already have your oil and gas generation facilities. How much more is this likely to add to our bill to convert these greenhouse gas generating facilities and getting rid of them and doing the sustainable energy approach?
Well, I can't tell you the exact cost between now and 2045 because, again, we are going to be a technology that's not in place quite yet. But I'll give you kind of a sense of it. So today we are already really far along in our transition to carbon-free resources. I'd say on an energy basis, we're about 65% carbon-free, well ahead of the 40% that's required in our state by 2025. So really doing well. We've been able to manage the costs so far. We've had some rate impact, but I think it's been negligible compared to the amount of transition that's taken place. So I think we will really focus on affordability and trying to come up with solutions. I think, James, you mentioned transmission, solutions that help us long term and really think about not just what we need to do in the next 5 to 10 years, but what we need to do in the next 20 years and beyond to make sure that we're making this as affordable as possible.
So with that, I have a couple of questions. Number one is, I was reading in terms of the hierarchy of how we actually produce energy. We have natural gas is number one, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong. Number two would be solar and wind, and oil was actually number four. So that's one thing. Is that a correct assessment of how we're getting our energy needs right now?
Not quite.
Okay.
So today we have about, between coal and gas, make up only about 28% of our installed capacity. The remainder is zero carbon resources. That's our wind, our solar, our storage, our nuclear, and our geothermal that we have in place today. So the vast majority is zero carbon resources.
And the bill that was just passed recently takes away tax revenues for solar and wind, but kept them. And I'm wondering, the costs of solar right now and wind, is it really impacted by those tax incentives being taken away, which, by the way, doesn't really happen until 2028, so we know anything can happen by then. But really, because I've heard that the costs, and I think you're confirming that, of solar and wind energy have come so far down from, say, 15 years ago.
Yes, they have dropped tremendously in the last couple of decades and continue to drop. I think we do see a global demand increasing. You get a little bit of a bump back up in the last couple of years based on, we'll take solar as an example, the last 20 years. The prices have dropped precipitously. It's any kind of, to answer the question about the cost specifically, so any kind of phasing out of federal tax credits for renewables will have a short-term impact on their cost. We have contracts in place today that secure our prices for our resources, so we should not see significant impacts or any impacts to existing arrangements. And in the arrangements that we are in the process of signing on the dotted line, we're again trying to put protections in there for customers to make sure we're not exposing them to crazy tariff or federal tax credit whipsaw changes. And even on the non-generation side, as we build our substations and things like steel and aluminum tariffs take place, we've seen a lot of vendors willing to share the cost of those tariffs. So it's not directly falling on customers in all cases.
I know you have some geothermal production in the state of New Mexico. I know there's been interest in the Caldera area, which has natural hot springs. I've visited them. And is there any plan for tapping the Caldera's natural hot springs?
We don't have any specific sites for the next generation of advanced geothermal. Met is looking around the state and working with their partners at New Mexico Tech and others to try to make sure they can locate with their XGS project a good location for the next geothermal. I don't know that Valles Caldera was on their list specifically, but there's a rich source of geothermal all over the state that we can tap, and I think we'll continue to look at that as a technology for us going forward. Our plans today do not include additional geothermal in the near term, but in the long term, I think that is going to be a viable option for us. We will need some kind of dispatchable renewable, whether it's geothermal, and I think New Mexico is the perfect place for that, or dispatchable hydrogen. Those kinds of things are really the next round of resource types that have the characteristics we need to ensure reliability in a fully renewable portfolio.
I do have one more question about, because I know batteries are on your agenda. How far along is battery technology in keeping costs low?
Battery technology has come a long way. In fact, we're going to have about 1,000 megawatts, just under half of our load will be able to be served by battery. It's all in place right now. The really nice part of batteries is they are so fast acting, so they make a great pairing with both charging any excess renewable energy, but they also help to keep the system fuel. So they've come a long way and have been very economic in the near term.
Okay, Mish, you've been a trader for commodities. If people were going to invest in any energy production, how would you recommend for them to purchase energy which is going to go up?
Well, there's already been a tremendous amount of speculation into some of the uranium companies like Cameco, which is Canadian, by the way, and also uranium itself. You can look at uranium through ETFs. We've talked about ETFs on the show, exchange-traded funds. They're baskets of different companies related to the actual future, and that would be URA, if that was something you saw as a great future. I will tell you that recently when I looked at a chart of uranium, it peaked years ago at 130, dropped all the way down to about 20, and now is trading at around 38, 39 as we speak. So we can see the upside potential there. That's number one. Number two, of course, is I would be looking into actual natural gas futures or ETF. That would be UNG. Same thing with oil. You can look at crude oil, or you can look at USO, which is the U.S. Oil Fund, which follows the futures price. This is where investing comes in. It's the original intention of commodities trading goes back to the 1700s as a hedge for farmers in their corn crops, right? Mm-hmm. So you can think the same way. And of course, you can always get more information from me.
What about solar or wind?
Yes, well, solar and wind, right. I'm remiss in not mentioning that. So solar and wind took recently a hit because of the incentives that were announced being taken away. But I don't believe that that's going to make any dent in the future for solar and wind, and actually probably now provides one of the better investment opportunities because the risk is so much lower with the cost of it on the exchanges coming down. So some of the typical plays to look at would be Solar Edge, First Solar, TAN, which is the ETF. There's also FAN, which is the wind ETF. There's lots and lots of places to look. Again, it just requires a little bit of research on your part.
For Business Bites, and on behalf of Ms. Schneider, this is James Werble signing off. I hope you learned a lot today about the challenges that we face nationally and in northern New Mexico about how we transition off of fossil fuels and into renewable energies. Mish and I both talked about ways to approach this optimistically, and we believe that P&M offers some plans for helping to make these transitions.